Just want to welcome everyone to the May session of the Mass AITC webinar series. We're happy that you're able to join us today. My name is David Paquette, and I am the Associate Director of Research for this NAA-funded Mass AITC Center, which is part of the AI and Technology Collaboratory, and is part of a larger group known as the A2 Collective, which includes Penn AI Tech, Johns Hopkins AITC, and the central coordinating center that helps manage across these three centers. So today we have a wonderful speaker, Nicole Werner, who in a moment will formally be introduced by Jenna Marcard, Jenna is a professor and chair of population health sciences cooperative at the School of Nursing at University of Minnesota, and she is a member of our stakeholder engagement and network and mentoring core. And so with that, I'm going to hand this over to Jenna to provide the formal introduction for Nicole. So thank you all.
Sounds good. Thank you, David. I'm so pleased to introduce Nicole Werner today. She embodies what I think of as interdisciplinary team science, and her training and professional positions have been from really diverse disciplines. So she holds a BS in psychology, PhD in human factors and applied cognition from George Mason University. She then served on faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering. And she's now faculty at Indiana University School of Public Health in their interdisciplinary Department of Health and Wellness Design. So coming from and working in a whole variety of disciplines, which has given her an interesting perspective on some of the issues she's going to talk about today. In brief, and she'll talk about this a bit more, but her research applies human-centered design approaches to technology interventions within spaces to improve health and well-being of individuals and communities. And she has a particularly strong interest in working with older and vulnerable populations and their care partners. From a funding perspective, her work has been supported by grant funding totaling over $24 million, and she's worked with numerous industry partners on product design and development. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Nicole. We're really excited to hear from you.
Awesome. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be talking to you about co-designing age technology for commercialization and impact. So technologies for older adults and their care partners need to be human-centered. And that means designed to be accessible, usable, useful, and acceptable to a diverse range of users. The current state is that existing technologies, and I'm talking really specifically in the space of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, where I spend a lot of my time, are not consistently human-centered, which diminishes quality and potential for impact. And it's been established that partnerships with human-centered design engineering experts are likely to increase the likelihood for impactful outcomes from the use of the engineering design process. And I'm quoting an article there from the Geriatrics Journal. So today, I'd like to tell you about participatory design approaches to designing technologies for older adults and their care partners for successful commercialization and maximum impact. I'll start by telling you a little bit about me and my work. So I started my research career really focused on the specifics of human-machine interactions. So you can see how it started on the left of the screen there. I really started in this kind of, as Jenna mentioned, multidisciplinary approach of thinking about human cognition and how it interacts with machines. And so over the years, I've expanded, as you can see, to a broader perspective of designing for that kind of broader socio-technical system in which people are doing that work. And then actually doing the design of these systems with the end users who are going to be using them, co-design, that I'll be talking about today. And that expansion of my research focus was driven by a lot of different factors. I want to tell you about one that was kind of a more salient driver for me that really drove me to expand my approach. So when I was a doctoral student finishing my PhD, I had the opportunity to work on a research project where we were interviewing older adults in their homes across the country and right after they were discharged from the hospital. And I was at one point interviewing a woman in her home who was caring for her husband who was diagnosed with dementia. We'll call her Iris. And Iris was kind of a petite woman in her 80s. And Iris really opened my eyes to the significant challenges faced by caregivers like her every day. So she described how she felt scared when her husband became agitated and that she didn't know what to do or who to talk to or who to ask for help. She showed me like a literal garbage bag full of medications that she was trying to figure out how to organize after the hospitalization, what he was supposed to be on, what he wasn't supposed to be on, and how to get him to take all the medications multiple times a day, given his behavioral symptoms associated with his dementia. And she told me about how every morning she started her day by putting on all of her winter gear, her hat, scarf, thick sweater, coat, gloves, because every morning when she tried to get her husband out of bed, he would kind of attack and scratch her. And that was her strategy for protecting herself. So she told me about how she felt alone and isolated and scared about the future. And again, not knowing who to go to for help or how to get the help she needed. So I saw with Iris this really glaring misalignment between the demands that she was experiencing in her caregiving role and the available supports over the trajectory of the disease of the person that she was caring for. Essentially, that the system for Iris was designed for her to fail. And I knew I could use my field, which is human factors engineering, to co-design systems that could improve the lives of caregivers like Iris and the people that they're caring for. And so that really led to this more expanded approach and focus on co-design of systems. So the first question to answer today is, what is human factors engineering? Human factors engineering is about studying and improving work. And work is really broadly defined. It's that multiple levels of cognitive, physical, and emotional tasks performed within socio-technical systems. And it's about aligning the system with human capabilities and needs. And the goal is really to improve both performance of work and the well-being of those in the system. In my work, I've been applying human factors engineering to co-design and implement technology interventions that really seek to transform this patient journey, with a particular focus, as I noted, on people living with dementia and their care partners. And I'll just stop and say that I'll flip back between caregiver and care partner today. And I mean those family and friends who are caring for the person living with dementia. I use both terms because some different people prefer different terms, so I just use both. At the foundation of my work is that older adults and their caregivers do a type of health work that's distributed over time, space, and people, which I term the patient journey. The second foundational concept is that the patient journey needs to be transformed, right? We learned from Iris, and there are many like her and her husband, right? Older adults and care partners who are managing chronic conditions in the home and community and across healthcare settings are doing this without the system being designed to support that work. And this is leading to suboptimal outcomes for caregivers, older adults, the healthcare system, and our communities. The third concept is that we can transform the patient journey through human-centered co-design. And that using these co-design approaches can lead to solutions that are more likely to be usable, useful, and acceptable to a diverse range of users. Okay, so let's take a simple example of why we need this human-centered co-design approach. I'd like you to take a moment, and if you could just imagine a situation for me, I think many of us have experienced before. Okay, so imagine you're walking to a meeting, maybe you're running a bit late and you're walking quickly. This is, maybe you have to imagine way back to the before times when we physically went to meetings. Okay, so you're walking and you arrive at the door and you see in front of you the door that's here on the screen. What do you do? When you arrive at this door, you're probably going to grab the handle and pull, but it's locked. You pull it again. Yep, still locked. Now you're questioning if you went to the wrong place or got the wrong time. You pull out your phone, you're checking your calendar, and just as you access your calendar, the door opens from the inside and you realize, oh, the door wasn't locked at all. The door needed to be pushed instead of pulled to open. At this point, you might be feeling silly, but you should not. The door, again, the door is literally designed for you to fail. And this design of doors is just a really simple and kind of perfect representation of the need for human-centered co-design, right? The need to design for user behavior and context. And then with human-centered design, the door would be designed to support the interaction between the human and the system within the context of use. Understanding that if a door is to be pushed to open, you need a flat surface, right, with no handle. That's going to afford itself to pushing rather than attempting to pull. If you see a handle, humans are going to pull. And so this kind of simple but key example of the foundation of human-centered design. Again, you can design to support successful experiences based on users' needs and behaviors in context, or you can design to facilitate frustration, error, and abandonment. And this concept can be applied across systems, right, from doors to mobile apps, wearable technologies, organizations, and all the things in between. And we do see this playing out in kind of the age technology space. So one example is in 2022, some colleagues and I conducted an evaluation of mobile apps available on the market for caregivers of people living with dementia. And what we found in doing a systematic evaluation of all of these apps that were available is that they were not human-centered and they were not of sufficiently high quality. And that this means they're more likely to cause more harm than good, not meet needs, right? So caregivers are left with their needs unmet, and compound existing burden, which we learned from Iris can be really, really bad thing to do, right? So technology has this great potential, but it's not always living up to that potential. So today I want to talk specifically about co-design, but I want to start more broadly. And that co-design is one approach within the broader field of human-centered design. And I just want to take a minute to define that, because I think we hear this term a lot, design thinking or human-centered design, and we're not always defining the term. So human-centered design, if you'll allow me to just read the definition, is an approach to interactive systems development that aims to make systems usable and useful by focusing on the users, their needs and requirements, and by applying human factors, hey, there's that human factors thing again, usability knowledge and techniques. This approach enhances effectiveness and efficiency, improves human well-being, user satisfaction, accessibility, and sustainability, and counteracts possible adverse events of use on human health, safety, and performance. So kind of put simply, I would say, can say human-centered design is about understanding user needs and behavior within the context and designing to address the alignment between the needs, behavior, and the system or the context. So this is what human factors engineers do. We design systems based on that deep understanding of user needs and behaviors and how those interact with the system. So within human-centered design, there are some key principles which are also foundational to co-design. One is about interaction, right? How are people interacting in their context? In the case of human-centered design, really understanding that user and their behavior within the context of use. The second is engagement. So engaging end users throughout the process. Sometimes as co-designers, right, in the case of a lot of the work that I do, but really defining who are those people who are going to be using and broadly defining using that tool or product or process, and how do we engage them in the process of design. The third is iteration. So this process is not linear, and you learn from engagement how and where to make changes, adjust pain points, and bring forward helpful designs. So in the evaluation of outcomes in this process, those should feed back to inform the next stage of the design process. And then in that case, the stages of design are iteratively repeated, and each cycle is bringing you closer to the solution. Now, when we're considering technology interventions for older adults and care partners, a key framework to know about is the NIH stage model for behavioral intervention development. And this model describes the pipeline that intervention should go through from stage 0 through stage 5, where the initial evidence for the need of a new technology intervention is established at stage 0, and then the intervention is developed in stage 1, early testing in stage 2, and then through kind of real world effectiveness, implementation and dissemination in 3, 4, and 5. So the traditional and kind of historic approach to designing and creating technology interventions has tended to kind of bypass stage 1 with a designer knows best approach or a researcher knows best approach. And stage 1, again, includes those activities related to creating and preliminary testing of a new behavioral intervention. So there's often this designer knows best approach. To build technologies that can transform the patient journey, we've come up with kind of a different approach to stage 1. And this is pictured here, embedded within kind of a pipeline depiction of the NIH stage model. And it's spanning the stages of development using a human-centered design approach with an emphasis on the stage 1 design process. So the human-centered co-design approach starts at the source, that's stage 0, studying actual work and behavior in context, and then creating that foundational knowledge and bringing that to the end users who come to the table to design the technology in stage 1 and iterate on the design through user testing. So stage 1 is kind of stage 1A is design and stage 1B is early testing. And then taking it through the pipeline so that it can be successful in efficacy and effectiveness and implementation. This model indicates that once a scientific mechanism, that stage 0 mechanism for an intervention is established, it's really critical that the next step is the systematic design and preliminary testing, right? That's stage 1 with the target population. If technology intervention researchers are bypassing this stage, interventions may work in ideal settings, but not in real world settings. So it might work in stage 2 in the efficacy testing, but it might fail in later stages or even as it leaves the pipeline, right? So neglecting stage 1 as the design process of stage 1 has the potential to lead to negative efficacy effectiveness trials and impose barriers to implementation outside research settings at stage 5 and beyond at commercialization. So our approach, as noted, has been to integrate participatory co-design approaches into stage 1 of this pipeline. So what exactly is co-design? Co-design is sometimes referred to as participatory design, cooperative design, co-creation, and it's an approach within human-centered design that engages end user representatives as members of the design team. Some of the key concepts of co-design that kind of define it as co-design are collaboration and democratization, right? So the end users as the designers, collaborating with them as the designers. And then also being generative. So instead of having like a usability test where you're being purely evaluative of a technology, the co-design process is about generating design. In this approach, by doing the generation, by doing the collaboration with the end users, it's more likely to increase the chances that designs will be usable, useful, relevant, acceptable, and adaptable to diverse needs. I can also find it helpful sometimes to say what something is not, right, to help define. And so co-design is not a focus group. So focus group is where you're asking a series of predetermined questions using an interview guide and getting answers and experiences from those questions. And the difference here is really about the degree of active participation and collaboration in co-design. So again, in co-design, end users are engaging in design activities. They're generating products. You can see here on the screen, there's like a pile of design materials that were used in actual design sessions. So end users are using those to sketch, cut up materials, create storyboards, design prototypes within the sessions. And it follows then again that co-design is not just about asking like, what do you like? What color looks best? This is kind of a common misconception that I hear about human-centered design overall. Rather, co-design is about uncovering and designing for the alignment of user behaviors, needs, and contexts that's driven by the end users themselves. The co-design process can be conceptualized as a funnel. So you start with situating the team with a problem or challenge to be addressed, and then we move across 5 stages, and we move to solution generation, in which co-designers begin with lots of divergent ideas and then kind of work towards convergence throughout the session. And we've refined this into a 5-stage process that we actually conduct remotely now. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so similarly, the prototype that is being created is created throughout the sessions. So we start with kind of lower fidelity sketches made using paper and pencil. So you can see one of those on the bottom left of the screen. And then progressively comes more high fidelity and interactive using prototyping software across the sessions. So you can see in this screen, we started in the top left with lots of kind of divergent ideas, and we started trying to bring them together through convergence. Then we started sketching on the top right, and then through the bottom left, kind of more high fidelity sketches. And then on the bottom right, finally coming to the prototyping software and creating the product. And this was all done with a group of care partners. A critical aspect of the co-design approach is forming the design groups, right? Who are going to be the designers? I'm going to note some of those key considerations, and there are a lot of them, but it's important to just kind of know the landscape of those considerations, and so you can start to be intentional as you're thinking about doing a co-design process. So first, it can be challenging to define who the end user is. So especially when considering commercialization, who are the potential partners, customers, whose problems are we trying to solve? And it's often not just one, right? And so that's the challenge in this co-design process, is the end user isn't typically just one group. Who are the current experts in terms of training and also in terms of lived experience, right? So considering expertise in different ways. This is also bringing up considerations of how to form your groups, how many groups and sessions to hold, how to integrate advisory boards and lived experience panels that may need to provide input. So it's important to really map this out, all the aspects, and figure out how are you going to integrate these perspectives, knowing there's going to be trade-offs to make in terms of what's feasible, and making sure you've identified who is the core end user group that you're going to want having kind of the last say on all the design decisions. So a lot of times in the work that I'm doing, the caregivers of the person living with dementia are the kind of final end user of the product, and so tend to like have the last say, so to speak, in the design decisions. Okay, so in addition to considering who the group will be comprised of, we tend to try to have an odd number of co-designers if possible to allow for tie-breaking perspectives. And we try to keep the numbers small in the groups. So about, 7 people is an ideal number because that allows everybody to have time to provide their perspectives. You can also have larger groups that you can break into smaller groups for activities and decisions. So you can attain the goal of having the larger group or the larger sample, while also giving everybody space to provide their perspectives. Another consideration that we've been, that has been a challenge for us, is whether the group will be in person or virtual. So both options, again, have their pros and cons. For example, the in-person allows for that really kind of in-depth hands-on design work that I showed you those pictures of, right, with the cutting and everything, and the Post-it notes, and really the physical hands-on paper and drawing. But the virtual approaches or the remote approaches allow for more diverse and also easier participation, especially when you're working with more vulnerable populations or populations that have high demands. It's much easier for them to participate if they can just hop on a video conferencing software. There's also the option to think about conducting a more individual participatory approach that allows for end user input without the larger design groups. So I'll give an example of that in just a minute. And the key really here, again, is to just consider these aspects and then decide for the goals of the project and the resources available, what trade-offs will be the most appropriate. So I'll give you an overview of this process from my own work in the case of care partners managing medications for people living with dementia. So in tech, again, we're often using kind of that traditional top-down designer or engineer knows best approach. And this has led to some really innovative solutions for medication management, and in particular to support older adults and their care partners with medication management. So this is like pill organizers, electronic solutions like pill dispensers, alerts, smart med bottles, other smart systems. There's some mobile apps out there that are really great. Lots of innovative products available. And then there's the kind of reality of how older adults are managing medications in their home. It's really heterogeneous. There are older folks using these technology solutions, and let me tell you that we've heard some amazing stories of how people have created their own technology solutions. So that's happening. And then there are a lot of folks that are creating their own systems without any technology. So in the picture on the bottom right, of the screen, you'll see like some medication bottles mixed in with paperwork and other items on a computer desk. And it may not look like it, but these bottles are actually strategically placed to be taken within that person's own kind of medication system, right? The pictures on the top right and bottom left are from caregivers who are trying to support a person with dementia in taking their medications in an appropriate way. And they're using very different strategies to do this. One where they give kind of a prompt, and I love the save this paper, right? Don't throw this paper away. And the other where it's just pills on a plate, right? So one very directive and one kind of a little bit more passive. And then the picture on the top left shows a person's bathroom with medications kind of filling the counter and the drawer. And this has all the household medication there, even the dogs. And this is this is the system that they've created to organize their medications, right? So if we want to design age-inclusive technologies for medications, for example, we need to meet people where they are and really, again, uncover and design for the range of behaviors and needs and contexts in which medication management is happening. And we can do this by using these human-centered participatory approaches to design. So that's what we did in a recent project, which we called Helping the Helpers. This was an NIA-funded project aimed to address the need to support caregivers who are managing medications for people living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And so what we wanted to do in designing this app was to employ 3 phases of human-centered design using participatory approaches to address stage 1 of the NIH stage model, right? So you'll remember that NIH stage model pipeline that I showed you. This is really about how do we design and do early testing in that stage 1 so that we can move on to stage 2 and 3 efficacy and effectiveness testing. So in the first stage, and the first aim to address stage 1A, we conducted a participatory needs assessment, and I'll talk to you about that approach in a moment. Then we brought together care partners to co-design the mobile application, and then we conducted some initial user testing to validate that design before going into development. Okay, so the first step was that participatory needs assessment, that stage 1A work. And what we did was we conducted what we termed a virtual contextual inquiry. So traditional contextual inquiry is a method for design researchers to observe people in their natural context while they perform tasks as they normally would, so kind of doing their work. And that's coupled with some interview probes that are kind of during and after the observation that clarify what the person is observing. So the purpose of contextual inquiry is to understand the details implicit in what people do, including their approaches to work and strategies they use, and where they're experiencing challenges or pain points. And the observer or researcher takes the role of apprentice. So they're letting the observed expert's behavior guide the data collection, right? So they're observing and just letting that person do their work. To do this kind of approach with caregivers managing medications, we couldn't just go to their house and observe them and sleep on their couch. So we developed this virtual contextual inquiry approach, which starts with a remote interview to understand the medication management process that they're doing, their daily tasks, kind of as they describe them. And then for a week, we do what we call a virtual observation, in which caregivers are sending us multimedia messages, so videos, pictures, audio message, text messages throughout the day about the different medication management tasks and experiences they're having throughout the week. And then at the end of that virtual observation period, we do another remote interview asking follow-up questions to clarify that observation, just like you would in a traditional contextual inquiry. And so this is one of those kind of individually focused participatory approaches that allows us to get an in-depth understanding of the individual's behavior and needs within the context and their own socio-technical system. And so just as an example, two messages that we received. So one on the right, you saw that in the earlier pictures, a picture describing what they're doing, how they're preparing the medication. And then on the left, a more detailed kind of message and about what happened that day that didn't go very well. And interestingly, this is kind of more a person who was using more kind of high-tech solutions. They're using some alerts and dispensers in the home of the person with dementia to try to get them to remember to take the medications. But the alert was having problems, and that was causing some frustration and challenges. So from these data, what we did was we were able to map out the kind of journey of caregiver-assisted medication management and identify the different journeys people experienced and the pain points among those journeys, and then connect those to specific kind of personas, which are just archetypes, generalized archetypes. And they have pluses and minuses that I won't get into today. But we find them really helpful in going through the design process to remember that in these design groups that there's a range of different experiences, and we have to think about those and make sure that we're thinking about those as we're making design decisions. So what we did then was we took all of that data and those personas and journey maps, and we brought them to a group of caregivers to go through that 5-stage design process. And in that process, we had a group of about 7 caregivers. And then we also included, outside of that, some clinical perspectives of pharmacists and geriatricians on our team to intermittently provide some clinical perspective and make sure that was represented. But caregivers were really the ones driving the design. So we took them through this 5-stage process that I described, right? From problem identification, solution generation, right? Coming up with those myriad different solutions, coming to convergence on what the key features need to be for the minimum viable prototype, doing the prototyping and creating the initial higher fidelity prototype, and then evaluating the product. And so through that process, again, they just a couple of examples here on the left is we had them kind of pitch their solutions. And so we sent them design packets. Since this is a remote process, we were able to send them kind of templates and markers and things so that they could have that hands-on design experience. And then through that, creating the high fidelity prototype of the Helping the Helpers app. Then kind of maybe a little bit out of the box for user testing, traditional user testing, is that to validate the prototype that was created in the design sessions, we did kind of a low fidelity testing process. And what we did was we printed little cards, phone-shaped cards, with each of the features that were created in the initial prototype. And we sent them to 15 caregivers. And we asked them to kind of use the prototype, quote unquote, for a week. And that each day to indicate whether they would use the app during the day, one of the features. So each of the features was a separate card. And what they would do is they would scan a QR code on that card and let us know that they would use that feature, and they would answer some questions about it. And this process allowed us to kind of validate and refine the prototype features in situ prior to investing in development, and to really prioritize features for the MVP. Right? Because we could do some like one-on-one user testing, which can be a more traditional approach, but it doesn't allow us to understand how this might be used in context. And that's really critical for caregiving, right? Is this actually going to be able to meet the threshold of the many demands that a caregiver is experiencing to be useful enough in the actual caregiving environment? So we did that. We did this, and we were able to prioritize features for the MVP, which is now in development. So we've been applying this co-design approach to address several different caregiver challenges, which has led to multiple NIH-funded SBIRs and a growing suite of tools, including support for medication management, like I just described, preventing and managing behavioral symptoms, preparing for post-hospital care, personalizing financial and legal planning, facilitating physical activity, activating the care network through coordination and communication, managing swallowing disorders, and connecting to community resources. So we're really, through this approach, really trying to address the key challenges that caregivers are telling us they're experiencing. And then really by considering commercialization at the earliest stages of the pipeline, right? Really thinking about commercialization at stage 1. Once these technologies are taken through the pipeline, the needs of customers and partners have been uncovered, considered, and addressed in that co-design process and that participatory process. And so they're ready to be taken beyond the pipeline to be scaled and sustained. So by focusing on this co-design and stage 1 approach, I think we've been able to create technologies that will actually transform the patient journey. So we've gone from kind of the current state of focusing on education, and these are, again, care partner interventions for people living with dementia. So focusing on education to go beyond education for support for action, which has been kind of a move toward, that transformation of the patient journey. Moving from a focus on a single care partner or primary caregiver to activating and leveraging the potential of the care network. Moving from static features to adapting to changing needs across the progression of the disease, which has been so critical of an unmet need for caregivers. And then moving kind of from a one-size-fits-all approach to more smart, data-driven support that can personalize and individualize solutions for caregivers based on their specific needs and where they are in the care journey. These co-design approaches that we're using are still evolving. So I think one thing I want to leave you with today is that we are continuing to refine the process to optimize outcomes in terms of meaningful engagement experience, usability and usefulness of the product produced, and also the potential of the product to improve outcomes, right, impact. So when thinking about the co-design process, I think some considerations, in addition to what we've already talked about, that we've been learning about, are the following. So one is how much you define your question when you're coming in. So you have an idea for a technology, but making sure that you have loose connections to what that solution is going to be. Because what's happened to me is coming in with a really clearly defined solution and then having the co-designers say like, no, we don't want that or need that. This is what we need. And having to then switch gears and be willing to be flexible in that way. Preparing co-designers for engagement. So really thinking about, these are people who have never been involved in the design process. How do we set expectations and let them know what they're going to be experiencing so that they're ready and prepared? The other piece is giving them, pre-work before the sessions, which is something that I didn't think that caregivers would want. But through my work and doing several design sessions with caregivers of people with dementia, they keep asking for more preparation work for each session. So really preparing them for engagement. Confirming time commitments. Another misconception that our team had is that we should keep the sessions as short as possible to really respect the time of the participant or the co-designers. And every single co-design session that we've done, the co-designers have come back and said, we wish we had more time. So we've been thinking about how do we really confirm those time commitments and be more expansive and flexible. The other one is supporting meaningful engagement. And so really thinking about each of these co-designers as an individual who might have different needs. And this can be about how they participate, right? Having accommodations, thinking about language accommodations, thinking about accommodations for preferences of activities. So we had one person, we do a lot of asking of people to draw in these sessions, and this person was like, I will never draw. And so how do you make sure you have activities that they can then contribute to the design process without having to draw? Measuring what matters, right? So this is about thinking, what are people who are co-designing getting out of these sessions? And how do we make that meaningful for them, right? And what we've been learning is that for caregivers, and I think this could be true across many different populations, is that the co-design process itself can be beneficial, right? So we've heard they're not feeling so alone. They're able to process grief. They feel like they have a community. And then finally, that feedback loop, and really trying to think about how do you keep the co-designers informed about the full process of the product as after the co-design process, because they want to know what's happening. And they want to know, when can they use this tool? When can they give this tool to friends, family, neighbors? And so I think keeping them in the loop and like really thinking about how you feedback that information is critical. So As you are designing technologies to transform aging, which I know many of you are endeavoring to do, I'm urging you to consider integrating these participatory co-design approaches into your process for successful commercialization and maximum impact. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm gonna, if you're willing to stop your screen share, then I'm gonna have David make one announcement, and then if folks can then are open to raise their hands, or I have plenty of questions in addition to that. So David.
Yep, thanks, Jenna. So I just want to let everyone know that in 2 weeks from today, same time, 3 p.m. EDT start time, we're having our next webinar, and it's on technologies that were developed and funded by Mass AITC's pilot program for advancing cardiac health monitoring. So there'll be one that's sort of earbud-based technology using sort of internally facing sound, so infrasonic, to measure cardiac health in older adults. And then another that's sort of developed and through user sort of design processes, a simple sort of smartphone-based way to measure blood pressure. So I think we'll hear some interesting, hopefully co-design, but if not, then hopefully we can, sort of learn from this and suggest things for how these things could be co-designed in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, Misha.
Hi, I appreciate the talk very much. I've been in the field for a long time when I got out. But one thing that I'm wondering about is the impact and emphasis on theoretical thinking prior to actual design and during the specification of the problem. See, if the reason for getting a lot of people or a lot of users involved is that we can't really think of all the kind of ways that people can interact with the devices or what have you with the system. However, we can do a better job of thinking ahead. So when you're designing, for example, procedure for teaching people who are very impaired to make tea, you build these state diagrams that try to capture every possible choice at any state. And if you do that ahead of time, you might be much better off in catching all the situations that will happen in combat situations. I was wondering if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. And thanks to everyone for bearing with my voice that's only partially here today. So hope you can all hear me okay. So I think that's such a great point, and I think it really suggests and acknowledges the importance of stage 0 that I kind of ignored today in my focus on stage 1 work. But that stage 0 is really critical. I do think they need to be complementary because I think what we run into, and I'm sure I'm telling you something you already know, but what we run into is thinking that we know how people are going to behave and then completely missing the mark on that, even if we think we've achieved, attempted to get all the solutions. So I think the key is complementary approaches that way.
I agree. We can't think of everything, but we could do a better job in understanding what are the possible paths through the process. And
Absolutely.
if you do that, we could actually employ something sort of simple stages of AI to actually come up with all the possible pathways through the diagram of states. Anyway, I think this is you're going in the right direction, and I'm excited to see that.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? I'll do my, oh, Christy, did you have one?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Dr. Werner. I'm Christy Martin, and I work with Jenna. I too have lost my voice, so I apologize, but thank you so much for your presentation. I learned a lot. And my question is, when you were talking about your prototype and sending or trying to gather feedback with the features, were you using EMA? Were you randomizing when you were sending that ecological momentary assessment? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so I guess you could call it EMA, but I would say that it wasn't super sophisticated. We were mostly trying to get them to self-generate when they would use it. So we would send them kind of a reminder in the morning, like, hey, remember, this is your kind of task for today. And then at the end of the day, we would send them a message and we would just ask them when they wanted that to be sent, like when end of day was for them. And that end of day message was a reflection on how could this product have been better for your day. But the during the day aspect was more generated by them. So we didn't EMA message them, we let them say, here's when I would use this during the day. So they had like 5 different features and the QR code was on the feature card and they would just scan the QR code when they were thinking about using a feature that would be useful to them. We also had a wild card in case they were like, wow, I really wish I had something, but your app is really not doing it for me. So here's the wild card and here's what I would want.
Yeah, that's great. And I like the idea of the QR code. Thank you.
I will say that like it's an overly burdensome participation. So it was a little bit hard to get participants. So I think there's drawbacks there, but I think it was the first time we'd done that kind of approach. And I think it has a lot of potential, but it needs to be refined for sure. Well, hi.
Randall.
Hi. Good to see you, Nicole.
You too.
Great job. Wondering if you'd like to comment for our audience on your perspective on how the NIH grant review process lines up with user-centered design thinking, and whether we're kind of still working on that or where we're at on that journey as well.
Ooh, I like that question. Yeah. So I have so many comments on that, actually. I'll say a few things. One is that this is the big reason why I push to put the human-centered design process within that NIH stage model. And I'm still trying to refine that because I think there's actually a huge need for more human-centered design in kind of efficacy and effectiveness testing, where we're using these technologies and efficacy testing them and then not changing them, even though we have all this data on use and like engagement and people engage in different ways, and we can learn so much from that. So that's a different soapbox. But I think it's really hard that the typical research grant reviewer does not always appreciate user-centered design. And I've been working really hard in how to message it in a way that clearly indicates its importance and need. I haven't mastered that sell yet, but I'm still working on it. I will say that in the SBIR world, and I've sat on those study sections and gotten those grants, they are way more accepting and like acknowledging of the importance of human-centered design in commercial products. So I don't know how we get the commercial product and intervention acceptance of, they both need human-centered design, and I hope we can bring those together at some point. But I have found that like in those processes, there's an expectation that you're doing some kind of human-centered design in the SBIR space, more so, way more so than in the research space.
Other questions? So I can lead with one of mine. And my internet was a little bit wonky during the prior question, so this might overlap, is So you've got this idea of sort of from the IDEO, this intersection of desirable, feasible, and commercializable. And ideally, you're going to hit all three. So when you're doing co-design, are you just letting people be at the desirable stage and not worry about those other two things for now? Or are you contextualizing that there may be a difference between what's ideally desirable and what's actually doable? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. Yeah, and I'm trying to, I've done these co-design sessions over several approaches, like several different kinds of grants. So some SBIRs, some more like traditional research grants. And so I would say like the traditional research grant, I do tend to be a little bit more allowing of that. And in the kind of SBIR space, trying to think about strategies where we get that intersection more clearly so that we can, you have a phase one, you have 1 year, you want to get to a place where you can go through to commercialization. And so I'll talk about those grants a little bit because I think that's probably the more like realistic space. And so what we've been trying to do, and I have these great partners, folks at Care Virtue who we've been working together over multiple years on this process and really trying to refine it. And what we've been trying to do is come in with that allowing of the desirable, right? The really blue sky, while also bringing in other partners. And so, like, for example, in a phase one proposal that's focused on rural caregivers and connecting them to resources, we had a design group that was the caregivers. And then we had a design group that was like the rural people from rural community organizations. And so what we then would do is kind of get ideas and realities from each group, and then we would bring them together and then share them back to the groups so that there could be those kind of, I guess you could call them boundaries placed, but driven by the designers, not necessarily by us. The other way we've done this is by having like software development people in the design sessions. So it's like, well, we actually can't do that. Like that's an amazing idea. We're going to put it over here, but for this MVP, we can't do that. And so like bringing some other people into the design group who can talk about feasibility and what we can actually do in the short period we have has been another strategy that we've used to kind of get at that intersection. Does that answer your question?
No, I think that's really helpful, and it moves me a little bit into one adjoining question, which is what do you see as, so every group that there's so many groups doing product development and idea development and that kind of thing, they can't all include someone with your expertise in it. So what are some strategies for kind of getting teams up to speed enough that they can carry out this work in a meaningful way without having to hire, people who do this on their grants? Or do you feel like only experts who have been trained in this can do this work?
I feel like I could get in trouble with this answer, Jenna. But my response is I would like to see more people doing this work. And so my whole approach has been, can I kind of instill in people some basics so that they can go out and at least with some kind of intentional process do this in some way. I don't think it has to be done perfectly necessarily to get some benefit from it. So how do you do this without expertise and training? I think ideally, yes, you have a Nicole Werner or a Jenna or someone like with that training on your grant, right? That's the ideal state. Next stage is figuring out how you can get some learnings in this process, right? And I don't know where you go to do that now, right? I can point people to articles and books. There's some great texts and articles out there that can give you the basics to get started. And I think that could be enough, at least, to help you come up with a basic approach. And I think, something that we've been talking about is, can we give some, workshops for people that allow people to just have the basics, people who are doing kind of health technology work, digital health work, to go out and be able to integrate some end users into their process, in particular in that co-design approach. So that's something that we're also hoping to offer in the future. But right now, I would say it's probably, a couple of books and an article to guide you.
No, that's helpful. Any other questions before I just keep continuing to ask
I say if
mine?
you want to get your grant funded and you want to write a really strong research approach for your SBIR, you should have someone with the research expertise to support that. So that's the reality.
I'm going to ask one. Oh, sorry, David.
I actually had a question. So related to sort of this, thinking of workshops in other ways, is a possible product or like application, is there a way to produce something that could sort of guide people through the process, sort of remotely like you're doing, but sort of training people or, providing steps to like, here is, input this is what we're trying to do, and sort of build out the framework for them to sort of run their own co-design sessions for products. Obviously, it's not as good as having a Jenna or a Nicole or a co-design expert on the team. But
Absolutely.
is that something that would you guys are thinking about?
I have an NIH grant that I've multiple times tried to get funded that is trying to do exactly that, build that infrastructure to get people to do it. I think to Randy's point, I'm not sure NIA is ready for that. So maybe a different mechanism, but I think that's absolutely possible and would be great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have one more question that comes up a lot with our pilot grantees, and I think with a lot of folks, is recruitment of participants. And so I really appreciated your comment about doing virtual work to support the heavy burden of caregivers and what that might look like to come in person for something. What have been your most successful strategies to recruit participants for doing co-design?
I'm seeing my research program administrators on the call. So shout out to Teresa, who's been instrumental in all of this that I'm about to speak about. But I think it's really about, for me, the most successful have been partnering with community orgs. So who are the groups in the community that are serving the participants that you want to reach? And how can you partner with those organizations? Those organizations can also become co-designers, right? They can be like end users, they can be proxy end users. And I think that the key to those partnerships is figuring out how can you support those organizations? Are you creating something that's going to really kind of support and change the lives of the people that they serve? And that's what they want to see. And they're very willing to support that if that's your goal and that's what you're doing. It's been my experience. And so they recruit through newsletters, they recruit through, support groups. I'm in the caregiving and dementia space, so there's support groups that we recruit through, but the newsletters, support groups, some of them have just like lists, like registries that we can go through. But those have been better than any other recruitment mechanism. And I'll just say that like recruiting online has become a nightmare. So be careful. Now with like kind of large language models and things, we've had imposter participants all over the place. Anytime you put something on social media or any website, we're getting people pretending to be caregivers who are doing interviews, trying to participate in clinical trials, co-design, everything. So just be aware of the internet recruitment process. we try to do direct recruitment.
Thanks again, Nicole. We're a minute over, and I just want to again acknowledge your expertise and ability to speak to this topic. And thanks to everybody for coming and staying around today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is fabulous. Really appreciate it, and look forward to coming to future webinars.
Okay. Thanks, Nicole.